The glamorous facade. Hollywood's golden era wasn't so golden. The 1930s and 40s are often remembered as the golden age of Hollywood, a time when studios churned out cinematic masterpieces, stars dazzled under spotlights, and the public believed in the magic of the silver screen. But behind the glittering facade was a truth far less charming. The industry that brought dreams to life was built on power, fear, and silence. Studio heads were more than executives. They were emperors. Men like Louis B. Mayer at MGM or Harry Cohn at Columbia didn't just greenlight films. They controlled actors' lives, manipulated the press, and decided who rose and who vanished. Talent agents, producers, even mayors and senators knew their power. But as powerful as they weren't untouchable. Beneath the surface, Hollywood had a problem. Labor unrest. Unions were growing stronger. Workers wanted better hours, fair pay, and safer conditions. The studios? They wanted control. And when negotiations failed, some studio heads looked for muscle. Real muscle. That's when the mob entered stage left. The Mafia saw Hollywood as ripe for exploitation. It had cash, influence, and no shortage of men who thought they were too important to fall. They offered a simple deal to the right studio bosses. Let us handle your problems and we'll all walk away richer. It wasn't about art. It was about leverage. Soon, union reps started disappearing. Film reels were stolen and accidentally destroyed. Editors and camera operators who spoke out were fired, blacklisted, or worse. And yet, the public never heard a whisper. Gossip columnists focused on love affairs and movie premieres. No one dared mention the shadows creeping into studio boardrooms. Because in Hollywood, silence was currency. And everyone knew that the fastest way to lose your career or your life was to speak up about the men who didn't appear on cast lists. But one studio head didn't just work with the mob. He welcomed them in, gave them keys to the kingdom, and that's where his downfall began. Every empire needs a ruler, and at Columbia Pictures, that ruler was Harry Cohn. He didn't just run the studio, he was the studio. Crude, controlling, and feared by almost everyone who worked for him, Cohn was the kind of man who could make or break a career with a single phone call, and he knew it. He started from nothing. Born to immigrant parents in New York, Cohn clawed his way into Hollywood through sheer force of will. He co-founded Columbia Pictures and quickly built it from a small outfit into one of the most powerful studios in town. But unlike the polished gentleman running MGM or Warner Brothers, Cohn didn't care about charm. He ruled with intimidation. Stories about him became Hollywood legend. He installed microphones around the studio lot to eavesdrop on employees. He timed bathroom breaks. He berated directors on set and screamed at executives in public. But despite, or maybe because of, his behavior, Columbia flourished. The studio produced box office gold and turned unknowns into stars. To the outside world, Cohn was a brilliant, if volatile, genius. But those closer to him knew better. They knew about the threats, the secret payments, the actresses who got roles not from talent, but from fear. Cohn ran Columbia like a mob boss, and maybe that's why he got along so well with the real thing. Because Cohn wasn't satisfied with just owning his lot. He wanted to crush rivals, control unions, and protect his empire at any cost. And when he realized the Mafia could help him do all of that, the line between studio and syndicate blurred. Insiders claimed he made quiet deals with key mob figures, offering favors, access, and contracts in exchange for protection and muscle. Whether it was fixing labor disputes or handling a troublesome actor, Cohn knew who to call. And for a while, it worked. His enemies disappeared. Columbia thrived. And no one dared challenge him. But Cohn made one fatal mistake. He thought he could control the mob the same way he controlled Hollywood. He couldn't. No one knows exactly when Harry Cohn made his first real deal with the Mafia, but those close to him say it happened quietly, at a moment when the studio's survival hung in the balance. It was the late 1930s. Columbia Pictures was on the rise, but not yet secure. Labor unions were growing stronger, and the studio was facing mounting pressure from IATSE, the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. Rumors of strikes swirled. Crews threatened walkouts. Contracts were being renegotiated with demands that cut into profits. For Cohn, this wasn't just about money. It was about control. And that's when the offer came in. Word spread that a certain Chicago-based outfit, connected to the outfit itself, could resolve the union issue. Quietly. In exchange, all they wanted was a seat at the table. A few anonymous investments, access to some behind-the-scenes cash flow, maybe even some influence over casting decisions. It was a devil's bargain. But Harry Cohn took it. Within weeks, the union tension evaporated. The strike was called off. The leadership of IATSE, once vocal and aggressive, suddenly fell silent. Later, it would be revealed that key figures in the union had been bribed, threatened, or outright replaced by men with mob affiliations. The mob hadn't just influenced the union, they had taken it over. And Cohn, he reaped the rewards. Production resumed. Columbia's books looked cleaner than ever. Investors were happy, actors returned to work, and for the first time, Cohn began to understand the full power of his new partners. They weren't just street thugs, they were tacticians, businessmen, enforcers, and they delivered results no PR team or lawyer ever could. But those results came with a catch: dependency. One favor turned into another. When a rival studio tried to lure one of Columbia's star actresses away, Cohn made a call, and suddenly, the rival backed off. When a screenwriter refused to soften a politically sensitive script, he was fired and blacklisted. When a gossip columnist began sniffing around Cohn's rumored affairs, her editor pulled the plug. Quiet threats, silent pressure. Columbia had become a fortress, but the foundation wasn't built on steel. It was built on shadows, and the mob wasn't done building. Cohn had opened the floodgates, and the water, dark and relentless, was rising fast. Once the first deal was struck, there was no going back. The mob didn't just dabble in Hollywood, they moved in, set up shop, and started rewriting the rules. And their favorite tool for control? The unions. At the center of it all was IATSE, the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. Originally formed to protect Hollywood's working-class technicians, it had grown into one of the most powerful unions in the country. Electricians, camera crews, costume designers, editors, they were all under IATSE's umbrella. Whoever controlled the union controlled production. By the early 1940s, the Mafia had already infiltrated IATSE at the national level. Mob fixer Willie Bioff, working under the notorious Chicago mobster Frank Nitti, was appointed to a leadership role in the union. And with Bioff came extortion, kickbacks, and quiet threats. Studio bosses who refused to pay faced walkouts, equipment accidents, or vandalized lots. But those who played along, like Harry Cohn, were rewarded with smooth sailing. Bioff made sure strikes never touched Columbia. He kept dissenters quiet and forced competing unions into submission. Behind the scenes, money flowed. Bioff and his mob handlers took cuts from labor contracts, film budgets, even actor salaries. It wasn't just influence, it was a full-blown criminal enterprise dressed up in union clothes. And Columbia Pictures? It became a case study in compliance. Harry Cohn didn't just benefit from this arrangement, he became an active participant. Insiders say he met privately with mob-connected union leaders, made off-the-record payments, and signed off on sweetheart contracts that padded Mafia pockets while giving him free rein over production. In some cases, he even helped blacklist workers who refused to play ball. But there was one problem. People started talking. FBI agents began quietly documenting meetings between studio heads and union reps. Financial records didn't match. Names kept appearing again and again in wiretaps and anonymous tips. And suddenly, what had been the perfect silent partnership started drawing unwanted attention. Harry Cohn thought the mob would protect him from chaos. But what he didn't realize was that by letting them in through the side door, he'd invited them to take over the house, and the rent was about to come due. To the average moviegoer, Hollywood was all glitz and magic. But to the mob, it was a cash register, and Harry Cohn had handed them the keys. At first, the profits came quietly. The mob skimmed money from union dues, under-the-table studio payments, and inflated equipment rentals. Columbia's budget lines were padded with fake vendors, shell companies, and mysterious consulting fees. It was the perfect scam, legal on paper, criminal in practice. But money wasn't the only thing the Mafia wanted. They wanted access. Mobsters began showing up at studio parties, always in the background, always uninvited, but never turned away. Cohn tolerated them because he had to. Some say he even welcomed them. They had influence, muscle, and connections, tools that could be used to manipulate press coverage, settle disputes, or encourage actors to sign unfavorable contracts. There were whispers that Columbia's casting couch wasn't just about getting roles, it was about paying debts. Actresses who thought they were auditioning for stardom found themselves in the company of men whose names weren't in the credits. Mobsters were treated to private screenings, escorted onto closed sets, even listed as silent co-producers in films they had nothing to do with. It wasn't uncommon for low-level gangsters to appear on payroll as advisors or security consultants. Some never showed up to work, but they always collected checks. Others made themselves useful, intimidating journalists, roughing up rival studio reps, or making inconvenient lawsuits disappear. Harry Cohn turned a blind eye. As long as Columbia kept profiting and the feds stayed away, he didn't care who got greased along the way. And the mob? They were expanding. What started at Columbia spilled into other studios. Fox, Paramount, Universal. Everyone saw how Cohn kept things under control, and soon, other execs wanted the same protection. Hollywood became a playground, and the mob played rough. But Cohn made one critical error. He forgot that when you deal with gangsters, you don't set the rules, you follow them. And one day, he'd break the wrong rule. For years, Harry Cohn had played the game perfectly. He kept the mob close, but just far enough away to maintain plausible deniability. He fed them favors, profits, and perks, and in return, they gave him control over Hollywood's most volatile variables: labor, image, and silence. But power has a way of warping perception. And eventually, Cohn started to believe he wasn't just working with the mob. He was above them. That's when things started to unravel. It began with small acts of defiance. Cohn reportedly began rejecting union requests that had previously gone through without question. He refused to honor certain payouts, delayed bribes, and even made off-the-cuff remarks at private dinners about cleaning house at Columbia. The mob heard every word. Some insiders say he was siphoning profits meant for his underworld partners. Others believe he tried to cut them out of upcoming expansion deals involving international film distribution, a move that would have limited their money laundering pipeline. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: Cohn stopped showing respect. And in the Mafia world, that's a sin you don't recover from. A studio accountant suddenly vanished after raising questions about a suspicious budget. A union boss aligned with Cohn was found beaten outside his home. Cohn's own driver, someone he'd trusted for years, quit without explanation and moved out of town. These were warnings, quiet ones, the kind you don't ignore. But Cohn did. He doubled down, enforcing tighter control over the lot, installing new security protocols, and demanding staff report all off-book meetings. He stopped taking certain calls, declined dinners, started keeping to himself. In private, those close to him said he became increasingly paranoid. He suspected bugs in his office, moles in his inner circle, and feds breathing down his neck. But it wasn't the feds he should have been worried about. It was the people he once thought he controlled. Because when the mob decides you've forgotten your place, they don't argue. They eliminate the problem. And Cohn, for all his power, was about to learn the price of forgetting who really ran the show. Harry Cohn was no stranger to threats. In Hollywood, he had built his reputation on being the most feared man in the room. But what was coming now wasn't a bruised ego or a legal warning. It was something colder, quieter, and far more calculated. The first sign came as a whisper. A note was found on his desk, unsigned, untraceable. Just a few words scribbled in rough handwriting. "We made you. Don't make us unmake you." His secretary claimed to have no idea how it got there. Security swore no one unauthorized had entered the office, but Cohn knew better. This wasn't a prank. It was a reminder. Then came the incident in the parking lot. Cohn's personal vehicle, always parked in the same private garage, was found with all 4 tires slashed and the word "end" etched into the driver's side door with a pocket knife. Studio guards were baffled. No cameras, no witnesses, just damage and a message. From that point forward, the tension thickened. Calls from anonymous sources started coming in at all hours. Long silences, then a soft click. Cohn's favorite restaurant canceled his usual reservation due to plumbing issues. A trusted assistant suddenly resigned with no explanation and left town. Even his housekeeper, who had worked for him for over a decade, claimed she was being followed on her way home. There were sightings of strange cars parked outside his Beverly Hills estate late at night. Men in suits sitting motionless, smoking, staring at the front door from behind the glass. And yet, nothing official, no police reports, no press coverage, just silence. Because that's how the mob operated. They didn't scream. They didn't shout. They warned. And those warnings were never bluffs. Cohn, once so arrogant, began to unravel. He started carrying a weapon, hired private security, and became reclusive. Meetings were held behind locked doors. Conversations were kept to whispers. The man who once barked orders across the lot now walked through it like a ghost, watching his back at every turn. And the mob kept watching him, waiting, because the next move wouldn't be a warning. It would be a reckoning. By the late 1950s, Harry Cohn was a man under siege. He ruled Columbia Pictures like a tyrant for over 3 decades, but now the walls were closing in. The fear he once commanded had turned inward. Every shadow seemed to whisper. Every silence felt loaded. And then, just like that, it was over. On February 27, 1958, Cohn died suddenly in Phoenix, Arizona, reportedly of a heart attack. He had been there for business, recovering from a string of stress-related ailments. No crime scene, no investigation, just a quiet death in a faraway place. Officially, the cause was natural, but unofficially, the whispers were immediate. Some said he had been poisoned, subtly, over time. Others insisted it was a staged heart attack, triggered by stress, but pushed along by a visit from old friends. Still others claimed he was blackmailed in the final days, forced to sign off on key contracts or surrender leverage. And when he resisted, the mob reminded him that no one was irreplaceable. What's chilling is what happened after his death. Studio staff reported that just hours after news of Cohn's passing, several executives from rival studios appeared at Columbia unannounced. Deals were closed, offices were cleared, files were shredded, and the people who had once avoided Cohn like the plague now moved swiftly to absorb what he left behind. The most haunting moment came at his funeral. Thousands showed up, including A-list celebrities, politicians, and major studio heads. But among the mourners were several unfamiliar men in sharp suits, dark glasses, and somber expressions. They didn't speak to anyone. They stood in the back, watched, then left. No one knew their names. No one dared ask. When someone quipped, "It took 1,000 people to bury one SOB," the joke landed flat. Because in truth, the funeral wasn't just a goodbye, it was a signal. The man who thought he could dance with devils and stay clean was gone. No exposé, no scandalous biography, no tell-all confession, just a cold ending. And that's how the mob liked it. They didn't need to make a scene. They just needed to make sure that everyone in the industry got the message. This is what happens when you forget who gave you your power. In Hollywood, image is everything, and when a scandal threatens that image, the system doesn't fight it. It buries it. That's exactly what happened in the wake of Harry Cohn's death. Whatever rumors had been circling, whatever secrets had been whispered behind closed doors, they vanished almost overnight. The official story? Cohn died of natural causes after a lifetime of hard work. Studio press releases praised his genius, celebrated his legacy, and sanitized his reputation. Columbia executives gave glowing interviews. Trade papers published eulogies, not exposés. The studio's PR machine went into overdrive, whitewashing a life that had been anything but clean. But those closest to the truth knew better. Behind the scenes, files disappeared. Financial records were lost during a transition of power. Studio contracts with suspicious clauses were quietly rewritten. Names of known mob affiliates were scrubbed from payroll. Even Cohn's own memos, once infamous for their venom, were either destroyed or locked away. And it wasn't just Columbia doing the scrubbing. Hollywood itself had a vested interest in erasing the mob's footprint. Other studios feared the spotlight might shift in their direction. After all, Cohn wasn't the only executive who made deals with dangerous men. He was just the loudest. So the industry closed ranks. Actors who had once feared Cohn now spoke of him fondly. Directors who clashed with him remembered him as passionate. And producers who knew exactly who had walked into those late-night meetings with him, they kept their mouths shut. Even the FBI, whose files on Cohn reportedly filled dozens of pages, refused to make anything public. Requests for records were denied or heavily redacted. Journalists were warned that pushing too hard might compromise ongoing investigations. And just like that, the truth faded. It was classic Hollywood misdirection. The headlines focused on his achievements, his filmography, his larger-than-life persona, not the threats, not the money laundering, not the bodies left in his wake. Because admitting what really happened would mean admitting just how deep the mob had reached. And if the public knew that, they might start asking questions no one wanted to answer. Harry Cohn's name is barely remembered today. To most, he's just another footnote in the long list of old Hollywood moguls. But behind that fading name lies a story Hollywood still refuses to tell. A story of unchecked power, whispered threats, and what happens when you let the wrong people in through the side door. Cohn's fall wasn't just a personal reckoning. It was a warning to every other studio head, every executive, every rising star who thought they could use the mob without being used themselves. It showed that no matter how rich, how connected, or how feared you are, you're never above the rules of the underworld. Because the mob didn't just want money, they wanted control. And for a while they had it. They controlled unions, production schedules, studio contracts, even casting decisions. They used Hollywood as a front, a clean, glamorous face for dirty money and darker intentions. And when someone forgot who really held the leash, they didn't yell. They erased. That's the real legacy. Not the films, not the studios, but the silence. To this day, no major studio has ever acknowledged just how close the industry came to being fully swallowed by organized crime. There are no documentaries on Cohn's mob ties, no Oscar-nominated dramas based on his downfall. The story remains in whispers, old FBI files, and unspoken Hollywood lore. But the signs are there, if you know where to look. A union that flipped overnight, a scandal that vanished too quickly, a mogul who died too quietly, and at the center of it all, a man who thought he could outsmart the mob by becoming one of them. But Hollywood has a long memory, even if it pretends not to. And buried beneath the palm trees and studio lights is a message that still echoes in the halls of power. Play with the mob, and you may win for a while. But the house always collects,